Hi everyone, my name is Natalie of the Alternative Belgium History channel, and in this video I want to give you a brief but good overview of World War II in Belgium. I'll start all the way from the Blitzkrieg in 1940 to liberation and the end of war in 1945, covering aspects of the war from occupation to collaboration, resistance to destruction, suffering by civilians, the concentration camps, as well as the Battle of the Bulge, for instance. Because some of these issues really deserve an in-depth analysis, I'll try to make a separate video of, for instance, collaboration and resistance later on. Please feel free to leave any requests in the comment section and I'll try my best. Let's start with this overview of World War II in Belgium. Traumatized from World War I, in which it suffered terribly, Belgium desperately tried to stay neutral and out of the looming conflict in late 1939 and early 1940. It had worked for its northern neighbor, the Netherlands, during the First World War, but unfortunately for Belgium, this was to no avail, just as in August 1914, Germany started hostilities on the Western Front by attacking neutral Belgium on May 10, 1940. My paternal grandmother was living in the city of Kortrijk in West Flanders at the time, and while she never really talked about the war, like everybody else actually, she did mention each year on my brother's birthday, unfortunately for him, May 10th, the start of the war in Belgium, how she remembered the German planes flying above their houses, dropping bombs on the city. That's how a teenage her knew that World War II had started. The actual fighting didn't last too long. The government had gone to France in exile, from there then to London, as the Germans were advancing. But King Leopold III had refused to go with them to stay as commander-in-chief with his troops. He surrendered the country on May 28th, a very controversial act as he did not have the permission from the government nor the power to do so, according to the Belgian constitution. This is one of the reasons for the royal crisis after the war, when the country had to decide whether they wanted to have him back as the King of Belgium. In the end, he abdicated in favor of his son Baldwin. After capitulation, Belgium was occupied territory under a military administration, except for the last few months of the war under a civil administration. With a military administration, occupied Belgium and northern France were actually better off than, for instance, the Netherlands, which was under civil administration, which meant direct Nazi rule for the entire war. That does not mean that people had an easy time during occupation. There was not a lot of food for civilians because they had to also feed the German soldiers. Food was also sent to Germany and therefore very strictly rationed for Belgians. Food on the black market was extremely expensive as well. In addition, men and women of working age were forcibly sent to Germany to work in the war industry under terrible conditions, or worse even, sent to fight on the Eastern Front against the Russians. Many fled or hid so they wouldn't be sent away to work or to fight. My grandfather was, for instance, one of those. He was just 18 when the war broke out, and he fled and he hid for most of the war in a farm. He was working on a farm in countryside France. When the war ended, he was already 23 years old. He didn't have another choice really to start to work for real now. Before the war, just 5 years before that, he was on his way to university. The occupiers were everywhere, from the cities to the smallest village. They requisitioned many public and private buildings for their own use as headquarters, soldiers' accommodation, offices, houses, but also theaters, cinemas, etc. for their own entertainment. Also as prisons or labor or transit camps of the SS, interrogation, torture places of the Gestapo. While Belgium did not have an official concentration camp, the labor camp of Breendonk in the former Belgian army fortress of Breendonk near Antwerp can easily qualify as one. It was not an extermination camp, however, as the ones in Germany or Poland, but many were killed or died because of the extreme labor and living conditions they faced there. From the transit camp in Mechelen in the former Dolcin army barracks, prisoners, many among them Jewish, were gathered to be sent off to the concentration camps in the east. 25,000 Jewish inhabitants of Belgium, many of them refugees from Germany or Eastern European countries, were deported from Belgium during the war. Only 1,200 survived deportation. A very heavy toll, but less than in, for instance, the Netherlands with its direct Nazi rule. For most Belgian cities, the deportation rate was between 30 and 40% of Jewish inhabitants. Antwerp was an exception with 67% deported. Pogroms, unfortunately, have also taken place in the so-called Jewish ghettos of Belgium, especially in Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi, Liège. There were no closed-off ghettos like the ones, for instance, in Poland. It was rather a neighborhood within a city where many Jewish people were living, like the Jewish Quarter close to the Diamond Quarter in Antwerp, or the Marollen neighborhood in central Brussels. Antwerp even had its own Kristallnacht, as there was a lot of collaboration within the Antwerp police force, a lot more than in other cities. Collaboration is without a doubt the most sensitive issue of World War II in Belgium. I will make a separate video about this issue, about this complicated and very controversial subject. Collaboration with the occupier ranged from collaboration out of necessity, doing some work to gain some money or food for the family, economic collaboration to political and even military collaboration. Some Belgian groups even went to fight for the Nazis on the Eastern Front. There was also a Flemish SS. On the other hand, just like in other occupied countries, there was a strong resistance movement in occupied Belgium. These resistance organizations had safe houses all over the country, where they often hid, for instance, Jews or Allied pilots that had crashed. They ran sabotage operations, escape routes, a false document service, and they distributed underground publications. The resistance also played a role in the liberation of Belgium, attacking some targets as preparation for the arrival of the Allied forces. Most of Belgium was liberated in early September 1944 by the British 21st Army Group, which included Canadian, Polish, Dutch, Belgian troops, the 15th Scottish Infantry Division and the US 12th Army Group and 106th Cavalry Regiment. There was relatively little fighting as the Germans had already started to retreat towards Germany. There had been some Allied bombings in the preparation for D-Day in May and June 1944, especially of railroads and other strategic locations. The Belgian government returned from exile and was then returned to power on September 8th after Brussels was liberated. But you can say that the worst was yet to come for Belgium, or at least for some parts of Belgium, especially then for Antwerp, the city of Antwerp, and the Ardennes region in the south of Belgium. The port of Antwerp was, of course, of great strategic importance for the Allied forces, as it was even then already one of the largest European ports, and it was accessible to ocean ships. It was about 90 kilometers inland, less than 200 kilometers from the German border, and less than 15 kilometers from the Dutch border, which was still in German hands at the time. And because of its importance as a supply port for military and commercial cargo and transport in the preparation of the push into Germany, it was also a main target, of course, for the German V1 and V2 bombs, the so-called flying bombs. Unfortunately, these flying bombs were not very precise, and hundreds of them fell on the city of Antwerp, killing more than 4,000 civilians. The deadliest was on December 16, 1944, when a V2 rocket landed on the roof of the cinema during a showing of Buffalo Bill movie. An estimated 1,000 people were at the cinema at that time, and unfortunately the explosion killed 567 people, including 296 Allied soldiers. Was the deadliest single bomb impact during the Second World War. December the 16th was also the first day of the Ardennes offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes. Hitler's last offensive, or some would call it Hitler's last gamble, was just like the V-bombs attack, to stop Allied use of the port of Antwerp and to split the Allied lines. The German attack was a total surprise because the Allies were really only focused on their offensive plans to push into Germany, and also because of very bad weather at the time, which did not really allow for any aerial reconnaissance or air support to take place. Fortunately, the weather cleared just in time before Christmas, allowing the Allies to use their air superiority, but it still took until mid-January for the hostilities, the fighting, to end. American forces bore the brunt of the attack and they incurred their highest casualties of any operation during the war, 81,000 killed or wounded. Belgium was declared fully liberated in February 1945. In total, 40,690 Belgians, over half of them Jews, were killed during the occupation. On May the 8th, the war officially ended on the European continent. However, the repercussions of the war would continue to linger for years, decades after that. But perhaps the most painful issue was dealing with the collaboration question. Immediately after the war, members of the resistance took the law into their own hands and publicly punished people who they believed had collaborated, including women who had been involved with German soldiers. Questions on how to deal with the armed resistance members and also the collaborators, amnesty or prosecution, and for whom, troubled Belgian society for years after the war ended. While World War II ended almost 80 years ago now, it has left its permanent mark on Belgium. Less and less witnesses are still here to tell their stories, but there are plenty of non-human reminders and remnants of the war. I remember as a kid playing in and around the many bunkers that were left after the war. The most impactful school trip that I ever had to take, was without a doubt the visit to the Breendonk fortress, the former concentration prison camp. But there are also the remnants of Hitler's Atlantic Wall on the Belgian coast, or the many monuments for the fallen. Each village really has its own. The Battle of the Bulge battlefields, of course, with the foxholes and the impressive Mardasse Memorial and American cemeteries for the US soldiers who died here. And I could go on for a very long time. I'll make some separate videos about some of the subjects that I touched upon only very briefly here. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see more videos on World War II in Belgium, and if you want to visit with me some of these locations in the upcoming months.